Happy Friday and welcome to Review JU, where we are looking back on the Avengers. That's right, not all of it and not the first one, but we are looking back
Or
on
the second.
Infinity or the second, but we are looking back on Infinity War and Endgame. I watched them back to back last weekend, and Spencer, I think you just let that pour into your brain last night.
Yesterday, yeah.
Yeah, so it's very, very fresh for Spencer, and somewhat fresh for me. And we're going to talk about what we think now about a year later. And watching them together. So first and foremost, let's talk about how we're going to look at this review. I think the first question for me whenever I watch a movie is, what were they trying to do? What was the intent of the
Money,
film?
money, 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 money.
And sometimes that's the answer. Sometimes that really is the answer, and you can tell. But often it's not the answer, particularly on the part of the creative team who does want to make money, but they probably also have another intent.
Totally.
And I think that's certainly true in this case. And so I want to talk about what we think they were trying to do, whether they accomplished it or not, and then whether that was a good thing to try to do first and foremost. And then we'll talk about things like the technical aspects of the film and the acting. But let's start with that first question. What were they trying to do with this two-part saga or 22-part saga?
With the 22-part saga? Well, look, the company line is that they were trying to tell a massive overarching story across 22, 23 films. I don't know how many it is if you include these two. Combines like Voltron to form one enormous super movie, or it's a TV series made where every episode is a $100 million feature film. That tells one long arcing thing and pays off all these emotional character journeys seamlessly. I think it was a little more hodgepodge and stop and go than that, considering, there's Hulks that don't exist in there, and I think Ultron sets up some Thor jacuzzis and stuff that never really happened or were meant to happen. I don't think it was as planned out as that, but I think the intent was to tell one cohesive story, like comics have arcs or runs that are about characters, and with the occasional enormous crossover event. And I think that they did exactly that.
I would have to agree with that. Ryan is going to fact check us on the number of films, the exact number of films, which I believe is 22. But I agree that that's exactly what they were ultimately aiming to do with this franchise. And also, it is very clear and obvious and known that that wasn't the original intent. Now, maybe, and I believe that Kevin Feige had this vision a long time ago, well before he was even able to do Iron Man. That said, no one knew that Iron Man was going to be a success and that he would be given an opportunity to do another Iron Man movie, much less this huge saga. So there were fits and starts along the way, and there were things that changed tonally in terms of approach, in terms of not too terribly in terms of the nature of the characters. I think the one outside of an arc and a character naturally changing, Thor sort of had to find his bearings, I think, more than some of the other characters did. With that in mind, with these two particular movies, I think what they were trying to do was satisfy emotionally the arcs of these first Avengers, the first ones that we met, the core group in this world, and then effectively allow us to move on from that to a potentially new group, or some old, some new. And I think they did that very well.
I think they did an excellent job with Cap and Iron Man and Thor. But if you're saying, the original Avengers, I think that Hulk, Hawkeye, and Black Widow's character arcs were cut for time. Literally,
okay.
like Hulk finds inner peace off screen in between the two movies. Like, hey, I figured it out. All good. Let's do it.
Yeah. Okay, go ahead. Sorry.
And Black Widow, I think she's always got. On one hand, I'm excited for her movie, but on the other hand, I don't understand why people are excited for her movie, because she's just always gotten short shrift. Like, she's got the infertility plot in Ultron, and she's just kind of like the backup to these other guys that gets imprisoned and ultimately killed. And Hawkeye, I don't know. Hawkeye killed a lot of people
He
in
sure
this movie.
did.
He went real like murdery with it, on like a worldwide murder spree. I feel like, if you're gonna play like who deserves to die, it's probably that guy and not Black Widow. But that said, I think that you don't really need to. They've always sort of been sidelined, so the ones you really need to stick are Tony, Cap, and Thor, and I think they did a beautiful job with all those.
Yeah, I mean, but to be fair, to be fair, I think you're right, but even more than Thor, Tony, and Cap, right? Because they've been at the center of this universe in terms of like that the idea of this dual oppositional leadership, and this vying for, in a sense, ideological perspective. It's not unlike the two popes, Spencer.
Oh, really?
In that regard. But
which one's the young pope?
Cap.
Okay.
Yeah. He is. He's the more kind of like liberal woke pope.
And this is different from the show, The Young Pope.
Yeah, it is. It's different.
Okay. Just making it clear.
But I agree that those were the two that got the greatest send off and arc, but they also had the most screen time before that, and they had the most. The Black Widow never had her own movie. Right? Like, so she never had the opportunity, the actual screen time. But I do think that she's come, if you look at where that character started in Iron Man 2, in that montage at the end of Endgame, like she has come a long, long way.
Yeah,
then.
You're right.
I think there's been a theme for her, and the theme that they've kind of had these threads, like the infertility thing, which I wasn't a huge fan of, to be honest with you. But the theme that I thought that was the most resonant for her was this idea of always trying to clear off the red on her ledger, the sense that she was seeking redemption always. And so in that sense, you're right. Did on paper Hawkeye deserve to die more than her in that moment? But her perspective was she had made mistakes in the past, and people allowed her to evolve and allowed her to try and make up for those mistakes. And she wanted to afford him that same opportunity and love him through it anyway. And in her mind, both of their lives had value, and she just valued life in total, and she believed in the possibility of redemption, and this was her move. So I actually, it half bothered me, her death, but in that sense, I thought it did fulfill what they set up for her.
Well said. Yeah. All right. You made a believer out of me.
Great. Let's talk about so Hulk, I'll agree with you, but we're not done with the Hulk. Okay. I think he just kind of had a lot of off-screen, including with Black Widow. Like they had a whole relationship, and then they were like,
no, they didn't.
Yeah,
no,
I kind of wanted them to just play Gwen Stefani's "I Know We're Cool" and just like leave it at that.
And by the way, I don't think you have to give each character equal time. Certainly, I wouldn't expect that. The movie's already 3 hours long. I don't think it needed to be any longer. It didn't feel like it was dragging, but I think if you put everything fans were asking for in that film, it would be a whole other movie, like an additional film. It'd be a trilogy.
When you look at them back to back, how do you feel about the two movies separately? So outside of the thing that we're talking about, which is just this big arc, how do you feel about them individually? And has it changed since you first saw them?
Man, I think that it has. I think that the Infinity War is not as good of a rewatch as I wanted it to be. I like them as a pair, and I really liked Infinity War the first time. I think a lot of that was the shock value of how it ends, and just the cojones on them to end it that way on such a low note. I walked out of that going, oh man, like they're doing it. This is amazing. I know they'll come back because I read Variety, and I know there's a new Spider-Man coming out, but it must have been like, Empire, like Han Solo's in carbonite. Oh my gosh, what's going to happen next? Which is a great way to end it. And it's something that Marvel films, I've never seen them do that before. But on the rewatch, man, it's just, I don't know how to describe it. It just feels like an already chewed piece of bubble gum. Like it's just a lot of jokes and setup. And then it ends.
Yeah, I mean, I will say, and hey, just a reminder to you guys, we're going to be taking your comments as well at the end. So we want to hear what you think about these two movies and if you've rewatched them together recently, if you feel differently about them or the same. I oddly enough, Spencer, both agree and I feel almost the exact same rewatching them as I did the first time, which is I came out of Infinity War and I did kind of have that bomb blast experience where it was like that was a lot of movie that just washed all over me. Um, but I didn't have the visceral response, the emotional response that I had to Endgame. And because Endgame really was the last one. And with Infinity War, I was just always aware that another one was coming. That's one reason. But the second reason, I'm going to put an asterisk on that. There is one moment that absolutely got me, and it's 100% due to the acting. So we're jumping a little bit ahead and talking about the quality of the actors here. Tom Holland,
Oh yeah,
his exit,
that's a moment.
oh, and it's him. He they improvised that. I think the legend and the lore is that they all shot their death scenes so that none of them would really know which one it was going to be. So that was him improvising, and man, that kid is talented. Oof. Okay, so other than that moment, it felt to me like it's an incredibly well made, very entertaining, beautifully acted film that felt like it was ticking a ton of boxes. Right?
Yeah.
Like it had a lot to do. And I can't blame them because they had a lot to do to set up this next film. And as far as a setup episode goes, it's gorgeous. But it is a setup
Yeah,
episode.
it felt like Marvel themed speed dating. Like they would pair up characters, then they would ring a bell, and then they'd all reshuffle and meet each other for the first time, which you have to do. And those are like delightful fan service moments. But I don't think it did them favors when you have Iron Man, Star Lord, Doctor Strange, Spider Man, all interacting with each other. It shows you that a lot of them are just like kind of quippy, sassy white guys. it's like, what if Jimmy Fallon met Jimmy Kimmel and Conan O'Brien and James Corden? Like, it's like, yeah, they're different, but they're also the same character with like slight variations. And I think Infinity War kind of put that front and center. Um, but I don't think that now it's meant to be viewed alone. I think you got to watch it back to back with the other movie.
Yeah, it's really, I mean, we've talked about this a lot, but it's like Marvel, the MCU is really like the most expensive season of television ever made. And there's better and worse episodes in any season, 22 episode season of television. And then really, but it's looking at the whole thing in total. Like you really can't judge a show until it's done. And then you can judge it harshly if you're talking about Game of Thrones. Just kidding.
Yeah.
Um, but
And you
so
also can't just watch episode 9 and expect like you're like I don't get it if you just started watching at Civil War. Like
yeah,
it would do nothing for you.
yeah, exactly. But with that in mind, the finale is probably the most important episode to some degree in something like this. And oh my God, I watched Endgame again and I had the same feeling as the first time, which was I honestly I'm in awe of the writers because this was such a difficult thing to pull off, to effectively do a time travel movie that goes back and reminds the audience. Basically, it was like, do you remember those episodes of TV where they were like the clip episodes? Where just
Yeah,
like something
sure.
happened to the budget and they would be like, do you remember when we were in the kitchen dancing that time? And it was like clip of them in the
Love a
kitchen
good clip
dancing.
show. Yeah, Friends did it
Yeah,
a bunch.
they did. And so essentially like this could have felt like a clip show in lesser hands. Um, but it felt like the absolutely beautiful resolution, even Captain America meeting himself, these different versions of themselves, reconciling themselves to their past, to who they are now, to where they want to go in the future. The fact that it was as emotionally resonant as it was, that they had to service all of these different characters, that they have to give Thanos this major arc, which I will say I happen to agree that the person that had the arc in Infinity War was Thanos, and it was well done. Um, able to do all of that plus action sequences, plus keep it funny, plus keep it moving, and have us sobbing at the end with Tony. And it's the exact right characters in the exact right order that say goodbye to him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's something beautiful and horrific to me about the script to Endgame. It's like the Xenomorph, like it's been purpose built like for one single purpose, and that is to entertain while delivering plot points at you, like but perfectly and smoothly and like with no friction. It's like gleaming, and like every single line and moment and character beat is like nothing more than exactly what's necessary to deliver like the minimum viable piece of entertainment to get you to enjoy what's happening and what's going to happen next. I mean, it's not like I think it definitely works for Marvel, and it works for Disney, and like I'm just like, don't you think it's a little bit horrifying? There's not a moment for anything to happen that isn't in absolute service of the overarching plot and the story. Like you're never going to get like a moment where they're hanging out. You're never going to get a moment where it's just like two characters like revealing something about themselves that's not absolutely relevant to Thanos and the end of the world and stuff like that. And like sometimes that's my favorite part of movies, but there's no time for this. It's just this pure sleek. It's like a stealth bomber, or like a nuclear warhead. Like everything is designed for destruction in this movie.
Well, we just want to thank Christopher Marcus and Stephen McFeely for creating such a beautiful warhead. And also Joe and Anthony Russo for directing the warhead out of our brains, I suppose. I don't feel that way. I really don't. And I think that there's just a part of me that is so attracted to symmetry and like order. I don't embody it at all. You guys have seen the show. But I'm very attracted to it. And I'm also attracted to actually counter that point a little bit, is that always, always, always in a film, I am asking myself, like, is this in service to this film? Is this in service to this story? And if it's not, I don't like it. Honestly, like, and I don't mean like messy moments, because that sometimes that is in service to this story, right? So I mean, in terms of, say, like with Michael Bay, for example, when he'll just have a crane shot at like somebody in a window who then is like, hey, that's in service of absolutely nothing. The camera is saying nothing. You are not using it with intent. You have no intent. You're very unclear about your true north. And I don't like that. I think a film, you should be able to distill it down to a sentence and then even a word. And then everything is targeted to that. And if it's outside of that, get rid of it.
Look, I think that works. Clearly. But I think that like there are things like to provide a counterexample to Michael Bay, like a Quentin Tarantino movie. So many times, like Kill Bill, there's when Beatrix goes into the sushi restaurant and there's this back and forth with her and Hattori Hanzo and Hattori and his assistant and stuff like that. Not really relevant. But it's delightful. Like it's just a moment to drop you into a scene in a world with two characters just being themselves and create a little world, a little pocket universe, and then move on. And there's no room for that in really blockbuster filmmaking in general, but especially not the Marvel movies. And I'm in awe of it. I just think that it's like there's something sort of impersonal about it when everything is so purpose built to like delivering you in this like smooth, perfect ride right to the end. Like it's just a different kind of filmmaking. This is a bag of delicious Doritos. This isn't like a personalized chef making you a meal that's from their heart.
Okay, well, I want to actually dig into that a little bit more, because I think you're bringing up a very, very important point, just in general, which is, what is the purpose of a movie? I mean, and now we've opened up with the idea of what is the purpose of this movie, but we're going to broaden that for just a small segue into what is the purpose of filmmaking, period, right after I do these announcements that Joe has asked me to do at this time. Thank you so much for being with us today and subscribing to our channel videos every weekday. Hit that like and hit that bell for us. That's what allows us to keep doing what we're doing here, and we love doing it for you, and we hope you enjoy it as well. Also, you can tune into Hey Fandom. Our next Hey Fandom is happening to date right after this show, with Greg Nicotero. You can sign up. There's a link in the description, and you can ask Nicotero your own questions in support of Direct Relief, which is coordinating with public health authorities and nonprofit organizations to get those medical workers right on the front lines of COVID exactly what they need in order to do their work, and we thank them for that. So we are going to get into a few chat comments as well. But first, I want to do that, let's say, a 4-minute segue into the nature of filmmaking.
Sure. Yeah. What's the purpose of movies? I think that there's many purposes of them. And I think there's art versus entertainment, but they're often in harmony and not always, there's art and entertainment in all films to different degrees. And I think that this is there's a lot of art in the Marvel films, but that the primary purpose of this film is to entertain you, and it does that perfectly.
Okay, so here's what I would say, and there's multiple purposes for films, right? And there were films in the 70s that were pointedly defying the. Okay, I'm going to take it back even further. Film starts and it's a train, right? Like it's just a train. It's a train, an image of a train coming at you, and people run out of the theater because they think the train is really coming out at you. Like that's how it starts. And from there, there's a lot of insane, if you look at some of the pre-code films, I think somebody mentioned this in our comments the other day, they are bonkers and bananas as people try to figure out what this medium is, right? And you have some great films in that era, and you have some great films in the silent era that are very experimental, like The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, things like that are just still to this day gorgeous. And then over time, a language is developed, right? And it's this language, and it becomes a structure that we now know and recognize, and is very comforting for us to see. And then at different periods of time, like in the 50s internationally, and then here in the 70s, you have people defying and playing with those tropes because they're saying, you know what, the nature of this 3-act storytelling does not reflect life to me. Life feels really different than that to me. So I'm going to make a film like Two Lane Blacktop that reflects what life feels like to me. And it's this very elliptical, seemingly senseless feeling, right? So a film the purpose of a film is like the purpose of art. You know what I mean? There's endless purposes. But yeah, I think Infinity War, to your point, and the Marvel Cinematic Universe, I think it's there to entertain. I do, but I don't think it's there to entertain with 0 calories. Like, I think it's there to entertain and evoke some sense of thought. When you think about the themes, it doesn't go all that deep, but evoke some sense of thought. If you think about Civil War, if you think about Black Panther, it does raise themes that bear talking about.
Totally. No, it's I think that they've done the best job of modern blockbuster filmmaking at least bringing up, if not really digging into themes of the individualism versus the collectivism and ideas of responsibility and free will and all sorts of stuff that they at least raise, and then usually give a compelling version of that theme to the villain, who then turns out to be a genocidal maniac, so that they don't really have to dig into it very hard.
Yeah. Well, okay, fair enough. But I mean, even with Thanos, in terms of his arc, in terms of his motivations, they made it very different than the comics. But I think it's probably an idea that even reasonable, good-hearted people have sometimes, that we are overpopulated.
No, totally. And yeah, they give him, again, like with Thanos and with Killmonger, it's like they give them a perfectly valid point of view, which is like, where humanity or existence is ecologically unsustainable. Like infinite growth is something needs to be done about it. But then they give them their answer is always genocide, so that you can always be like, well, we don't have to listen to him. He's the bad guy.
Right. Yeah. No. That's fair enough. And I mean, I think that it does to some degree have to be that broad. And I don't want to sound hyperbolic, but I will when I say this. We call comics our modern day myths, and I think to some degree that's true, like the comic book movies, because myths they're big and they're archetypal and they're very broad, but it's meant to, so is Star Wars, but it's meant to tap into deeper themes within you. And to some degree, you have to keep it that broad, because when you get into the real nuance, like you're not able to hit on that core theme as much because you're lost in the nuance,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, I
Both
mean
have
it's a
value.
miracle that they even bring this stuff up at all, and it's still entertaining. Like we don't ask, like you said, Michael Bay movies to talk about anything like this. Our expectations are raised for Marvel movies, partly because they're so popular, and partly because they're really good. You know, they're all good.
Yeah, and I
A few of them are great. I think Endgame is great in terms of what it's accomplished. The whole thing is great. I can't look at, there's very few Marvel movies that I can look at individually and say that's a great film. But I look at the totality of it and say, wow, what a great achievement in filmmaking.
It's an incredible, I agree with you. It's just like historically in terms of film, it's an incredible achievement. I don't know. And I also think that we tend to look at blockbuster films and say, okay, innately they don't have as much value as an art house film or an indie film necessarily. And I don't agree with that. I just really, really don't. There's a lot of terrible independent films.
Oh, totally. Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know?
I think I'm just hungry, but to continue like my Doritos analogy, like a lot of work goes into making a Dorito. Like a lot of art and science has combined to make something that's like so delicious. This is sponsored by Doritos, by the way.
Yeah.
So delicious, and like you can just, no one flavor dominates it too much. You know, it's cheesy, but it's not too cheesy. It's crispy, but it's not, but it doesn't like get stuck or cut your mouth. Like it's just the perfect chip. You can just keep eating it and eating it and eating it and eating it. Like that's incredible. That's an incredible achievement that's taken, I'm sure, billions of dollars of research to get to where we are today. And I feel the same way about the Marvel movies.
Yeah, we're going to take your comments here in 1 minute. I'm going to ask Spencer one final question. You've seen Boogie Nights, I know that.
Yeah,
Have you seen the movie Wonderland?
I have not. You've
Okay.
told me about this, that it's
Yeah.
the real alternative to Boogie Nights.
Well, it's like they're like two sides of a coin. They're like mirror movies. Like they, to me, like if you want to ask the question, what's the purpose of a film? You watch those two movies together because Wonderland isn't necessarily a better movie. In fact, it's probably not, you know, but it's certainly the movie that demands something of you in a way that Boogie Nights doesn't.
Yeah,
Um,
and I don't want to go. I don't want to Jokerify this too much, but like I think the DC movies, like Batman v Superman and Joker, are the counterpoints to Marvel films of how much can you let theme and these big questions of mythological import do the driving, and how much do you want to let like entertainment do the driving in your franchise?
I would argue that Marvel has let character do the driving because all of those themes are born of the characters, right? Like the big themes are born of Tony and Cap's different ideological perspective.
Yeah.
And it's really interesting too, and it makes sense for who they are because Tony was a warmonger, you know, like he sold weapons. That's going to be his perspective is going to be we need to weapon up. And Cap just believes in a different version of America than that. And I'm Team Cap, but that's a different story. Um,
Well, they switch places like throughout the franchise. I feel like Cap becomes like he becomes the rogue agent. He turns on his country, like in Winter Soldier.
I would argue he that's an act of patriotism,
Well,
sir.
okay, but just as far as he and Tony, like Tony starts out, he's the guy who's all like me, like I'm just worried about number one, and like he's like telling the panels full of senators to go f themselves and stuff like that. And then that's something that at the beginning of the franchise, like Cap would never do. Like Cap would never go rogue. Yeah, I don't care what would happen in like the 1940s. But then they kind of trade places as characters go, as far as like what they represent, to the point where they are at each other's throats in Civil War over, like, Tony's like, you need to be a patriot and sign on to these accords, and Cap is like, no, I'm me. I'm Steve Rogers, and I know what's good for me, and I'm gonna hold on to that.
I think one of the things that resonates too is like they have so much respect for each other. They've been so different, you know, and they've been so at odds, but I think they do. There's just a ton of love and respect for each other that comes through at the end of this movie. I also, I'll just confess, look, I love space. I do. Like I
Yeah.
love like visiting different worlds. I love a time travel movie. I've rarely met a time travel movie that I don't like. This movie just it ticks so many boxes for me as well. So I would say I do think it's a great movie. I think it's a great movie. I think it's a great movie that can't exist without the 21 others that
Mm-hmm.
came before it. But I really think it is a great movie. It's a very different movie than a Quentin Tarantino movie, but that doesn't make it any lesser in my mind. Um, Comments, thoughts, Spencer?
Oh, from me or from our viewers? What's the chat saying?
Well, here's what the chat is saying. Langley M. Neely says Hulk is my biggest issue with Infinity War into Endgame. His ultimate development was done off camera. Not a fan. Agrees with you on that.
That was a big part of Infinity War on the rewatch is Hulk's Hulk-tile dysfunction. And while it was played for laughs and it was a funny scene of him in the diner talking to those kids, like, yeah, just realized, why fight it? That feels like a movie. That feels like we missed an entire movie worth of growth out of him.
Well, you can thank the distribution rights that belong with Universal for that,
right,
because you can't do a Hulk solo movie. John Bainbridge disagrees with us. He says, for me, Infinity War was the highlight of the story. Endgame was a good wrap up, but it doesn't have much of a story. Infinity War is where all the pieces literally come together. I love that you have a different point of view, and it's interesting that we can have the exact opposite point of view about those two films.
Yeah, I wrote down just a few, something that I worry about with Marvel as a whole, but Infinity War especially. Here are just a few of the references that they throw out there in Infinity War. Kevin Bacon, Squidward, Ben and Jerry's, Grimace, Aliens, Footloose, Flash Gordon, Build-A-Bear, Back to the Future, Fortnite, dabbing, and on and on and on. And it's like, that ain't gonna age well. Like half those things no one's gonna know about in 5 years, much less 20.
No, that's true. I wonder if it'll matter. That's actually something that'll be interesting to look back on. Jody Harkavy says, in my opinion, Infinity War was a better movie overall than Endgame, but Endgame was a good tribute to the Avengers. Lots of people feel that way. Sam Barboza says, I wish we got a Thanos-Drax interaction in Endgame so he get a little closure on Thanos killing his family. I mean, I think that the way they did that actually was correct, in that he was always destined to fail in that endeavor. I think they did an excellent job of, particularly in Infinity War, having them try their hardest. And in any other Marvel movie, they would have succeeded, but they kept failing because that's how hard it is to beat this guy.
Yeah, the hopelessness of Drax is like kind of a running theme. He's always charging into and failing against someone bigger and stronger than he is. So there isn't time to pay off everyone. I don't think that the Black Panther gets pretty short shrift in these movies. I think that a lot of people are just who've been snapped they'll get their own movies later. Like there literally is not enough time to give everybody a satisfying conclusion.
Agreed. Maximiliano Klaus says, Endgame Thanos was a much better villain than Infinity War Thanos. That's interesting, because in my mind, and I wonder what you think about this, Spencer, Infinity War Thanos had a depth to him that then when they did Endgame and they brought him back from the past, he was more arch.
Yeah, I disagree. Exactly. I thought the highlight of Infinity War was Josh Brolin's portrayal of him, and the depth and the sorrow and the thoughtfulness that he managed to play that with, when his entire being was like a digital effect, was one of the best parts of that movie. And like his that scene with him and Gamora, on Vormir is. Like that's some great acting. You see it all on his face. Everything, the realization that no, he does love her and he does have to give her up is. I haven't seen that out of a big purple CGI thing before. Whereas him in Endgame, like it was cool. It was kind of like back to basics. Like he was the guy that would be like, "Go get them for me," and then just kind of take a seat. But I don't know. There was like it was cool to see him fight. But as a character, like he was less interesting. He's like a brilliant tactician and a fighter, but there wasn't much else to him in Endgame.
I agree, and that's actually one of the only disappointing parts of Endgame for me, which is I feel like they had done all this work, and looking at Infinity War, and I had this take at the time. I think a lot of people did was like, well, the protagonist of that movie was Thanos, which is kind of interesting, and they really made it work. And I cared about his feelings to some degree, which is impressive, and speaks to the quality of acting and actors they've gotten to populate this world, which is, I think, a big reason why it works and why we buy into it. But then, yeah, he just kind of became like arch Marvel want to do bad, like because he goes from saying, oh, I'm doing this so that people can live a better life, to I'm just going to wipe you all out, just because you annoy me.
Oh, yeah.
At the end of that movie, which seems so out of character with what they'd established previously, versus like, I'm just going to have you not remember the people you lost.
I mean, I guess it tracks with who he was back in 2012 or whatever. Like, that is the Avengers version of him. But I guess he just did a lot of personal growth between then and now. He got some therapy, really questioned his motives and where it was coming from, worked on the Thanos inside of him, and became a much more soulful person by the time Endgame came around.
I am going to take a moment, and I hope you guys will indulge me to pick some nits, just a few, and see. And I will say that these are things that I didn't notice as much on the first watch, but I did notice on the second watch. But it speaks well of the movie that I don't really care, because if those are the kinds of things that I'm walking out of a movie noticing, I know there's something far, far, far worse going on, and I can notice these things but not care. Obviously, everybody can breathe in space. Like, there is no atmospheric difference in any part of the universe. And
I mean, I'll just say maybe that's just like Marvel rule of the universe is like anywhere with life has oxygen too.
Okay, sure. And also, everyone anywhere with life, the beings speak English.
Yeah, sadly.
Okay, good. I'm just pointing. I mean, like, it's something that we just let go, and it's like, all right, fine. We just kind of like want to do.
It's also, yeah, they also use like Thanos at some point talks about like in a few years or in a few days or something like that. It's like, do they all have the same calendar? They all the same
Greek calendar?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's the thing.
That scene needed to be in the movie.
Yeah, exactly. So
where they all sync their calendars
on their iPhones, on their space iPhones. I mean, even I think that Drax at one point is when he's standing very still, and it's a Zorg nut that he's eating, and it's like, it's a combo. You're eating a combo, and that's what you're eating.
Oh.
So I don't know if it literally is, but it feels like it. A small detail is that Black Widow Natasha has the ombre hair, as we know, which I think is a sign of like giving up, But then she has perfectly manicured nails, and I think it denotes a lack of commitment on the part of hair and makeup. And I don't.
We all have like the things that get us through. Like this was her quarantine, where like she couldn't go out to get her hair cut or colored, but man,
not there in the other.
She could do her own nails.
Yeah, not there in the scene where she's eating the peanut butter. Go watch the peanut butter and jelly sandwich. She has perfect nails. So here's something that Shazam kind of aped a little bit, which was when in the end they are at miles apart and just having a conversation at this level and somehow able to hear each other and talk shit to each other. And then Shazam kind of apes that a little bit, where they're like, I can't hear you.
I think they all have like communicators, like stuck in their earlobes or something.
No, the enemies.
Oh, yeah, they do too.
Okay. That's another thing in the final battle. They were very, very, very quickly able to get outfitted. Like, if you look at where Shuri's makeup, her face, it's not the same as when she disappeared.
It's Wakanda. They just, I'm sure they have it's made of vibranium, and it's like a little thing that you stick on your face and new makeup.
Immediately, thank you. Okay. Another thing is that Doctor Strange was not only able to get this massive disparate group of people together, bring them in through the dimension holes, but also elaborately explain a plan that he hadn't been able to communicate to anybody, so that everybody knew what they were doing and what the goal was in this battle.
I think that's a 2-sentence plan. It's either Cap or Iron Man, depending on who they were more a fan of. Needs your help. Thanos is coming. Yep, let's go. That's all you
Okay.
need to hear.
Some of the time travel elements don't exactly work.
They never do. Time travel's not real.
Okay, I disagree. Um, and then here's one I wrote multiple mil noir, but I don't know what that means. What is
Multiple male noir. What?
MIL? Mil
Mil noir. Multiple mil
multiple mil
noir.
noir.
What could that be? Chat, help us out. What could multiple mil noir mean?
It's like clearly an autocorrect, but anyway, I know we got to wrap this up soon, but I do want to take a couple of more of these comments. 1/4 Canadian, congratulations, says unrelated. We need some more Paul Rudd appreciation. Paul Rudd is great.
Yeah.
He's so great.
He's fantastic. No one plays a lovable goofus better than Paul Rudd, and I think in a movie where I left him out when I initially brought that up, of all the seemingly samey guys all trying to be the funny one, like, because he really is the funny one. To me, he genuinely does make me laugh just off his reactions alone. And he did some good acting. He did some acting, some capital A acting in this movie. But I think that he's the chocolate chips on the sundae for me. He's great.
I will, and then I'm going to end on this note, which is at May Kabir says it was about ending the OG Avengers arcs. Absolutely. And I think, bringing us back to our original question, like this movie is not only a technical achievement, marvel, if you will, which it absolutely is. It's just beautiful. The effects, the makeup, the various worlds, the depth of the reality that they create. As much as I did not notice any of this stuff on first watch, and I still don't care. I'm pulling it out to bring it up and say I still don't care.
I'll pick a nit. I'll pick a quick nit. The Avengers theme is very rousing, and I love it. Dun, 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 dun. That said, I think that the score is kind of bland and kind of frenetic. They did this thing where they tried to give every character their own theme. But when there's so many characters, to me, the score, it was like listening to like a girl talk album where it's like 20 seconds or less of a pop song before it changes to the next one. I don't think that there was like a musical identity or a score identity across really most of the Marvel theme movies, except for the Avengers theme itself. I wish the music was better.
I agree. And I think in general, the score on these movies is really bland. And it's odd because if you think of like some of the epic scores in franchises outside of this world, I don't know. It's almost like they made that choice. I don't believe it wasn't a choice that you don't notice the score.
You never notice it. Yeah, it's just kind of background music.
Yeah, which in a way that may have just been a choice where they don't want too many things competing.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot going on in this world. That said, I do really think it is a technical achievement. I really think it's a like achievement of screenwriting almost above anything else, and acting and direction. So I do not regularly rewatch movies because I just probably rather watch something new. And I enjoyed rewatching these. I really, really, particularly Endgame. I loved it just as much as I loved it the first time, which I think is saying a lot. I have a lot of respect for what it is and what they accomplished cinematically. It is a historic achievement, and it is it's a massively entertaining. And also, I think there are some resonant themes, and it's driven by character. I don't think they betrayed their characters very much in this world. And a lot, like I really mean that. I think a lot of movies and particularly television shows all betray their characters all the time because they let plot drive things. And Game of Thrones did that. Walking Dead does that. Anything with like this massive an arc at some point betrays the characters.
Or commerce drives it, and they get a sequel when no one was planning on continuing the story. Or the story was already completed, but it made a lot of money, so let's make another one. I feel largely the same way that you do, Roth. My only concern about this film on my rewatches is that it's going to be a sense of you had to be there. Like, we are going to be explaining this to our kids and they'll just be like, what? Because they're not going to start at Iron Man. They're not going to go on this journey with us. They're not going to have been there from the beginning because so many things are callbacks. On your left, all this stuff is from movies like 8 movies ago or something like that. And that plus the pop culture references, and spectacle also doesn't age well. Like, when's the last time you watched Cleopatra? It's not the kind of thing that's timeless. And I think this is a great moment for me in filmmaking, but I think it'll be more of a box office footnote than it will be a film that people come back to again and again, just because people aren't gonna, something else to come along, and the next generation is not going to start at Iron Man. This one's for us.
I agree, but as one for us, it's a great one for us. And if you think about it, first of all, I would argue that the things that don't hold up in Cleopatra is it's not necessarily the spectacle that's not holding up in Cleopatra. Many other things that do not hold up about Cleopatra. That said, very, very few films do, like, there's very few films that we truly are timeless, and that's for a reason. They're of their time, and that if we were to take them, plenty of films, out of context, we would have a different lens on them than people do today. I mean, there's so many people out there that say Citizen Kane is overrated because they're not looking at it in the context of its time and when it was created and what it was doing. It was inventing things. It was inventing things that you are now familiar with, so you say it's overrated. It is not overrated. Not even close. So I would agree with you, but I think that probably most films have that issue. And as far as I'm concerned, that year, which was only last year, which I think is a decade ago, look, my top 10 films were probably like this weird Polish film where there's a guy and you have a camera on him for 10 hours, and I love it. And then in that list also lived Endgame. And that was real. I was almost surprised by it because, typically speaking, and it's not on purpose because I'm trying to be a snob, I just typically don't have a lot of blockbusters in my top 10 of the year. And this one did make it, and I still feel that way. Yeah.
Here, here. Well said.
Thank you guys for joining us for this look back at Infinity War and Endgame. We hope that you enjoyed it. Thanks for chiming in with your comments, and we will be back on Monday. What are we going to do on Monday?
What? What news is going to happen on Monday? If I knew, I'd tell you.
Oh,
I'd be in a different business.
You would be?
If I could tell you the news 3 or 4 days ahead of time, man, I'd be in a different tax bracket. That's for sure.
That's a whole movie that we could make. Go watch About Time. It's really fun. Oh, real suggestion for this weekend. I've been telling Spencer about it all week, but if you want to watch a new movie that's coming out on Amazon Prime this movie, there's a sci-fi movie called The Vast of Night. It's real simple, small movie, long shots of people telling stories. Not everyone's cup of tea. 100% my cup of tea. I recommend that you watch this movie. It's so good. And join us on Monday. We'll talk about news that Spencer's saying he can't predict.
See you then.